it is a real privilege to get to prepare for this talk, and I think in a particular way helped me prepared my heart to hear that call for repentance and unearthing that hunger and that making Jesus our first love. So we're continuing our series looking at the popes and their call to evangelism, and it's my happy chance to get Benedict the XVI, who's like as I said, it was a really special thing for me to spend some time reading again and listening to some of his talks and just the sort of intelligence, perception, the integrity, and the real joy that comes through. And I love this quote. This is the only thing you need to remember. This is Benedict talking about evangelization. So the heart of the matter is always expressed in these terms. I proclaim to you a great joy. God is here, you are beloved, and this stands firm forever. So just amazing to, for him to speak that to us. And I'd never so much considered Benedict under the figure of an evangelist. I'd always thought of him as a, like a theologian and other things. But when I stopped and thought about it, like we can really see the fruit of that in our families. So for me, in my conversion, my journey to the Catholic Church, Benedict was really, really important. And certainly for my wife, Grace, as well, that in fact, she might say that this book of his, Introduction to Christianity, was one of the key things that prepared her for her conversion. And I actually picked up this as a spare copy in Lifeline, so if anyone wants it, come and see me afterwards. Well worth a read. But I've gone through and I've got a whole heap of quotes, far too many quotes than I can actually share with you. But my hope is that you'll also be sort of encouraged and inspired. That you'll hear that call to conversion and call to mission. And we'll have a little bit of time at the end to share anything that struck with us. So keep an eye open for that. So before I get stuck in, I'll just give you a really quick sketch of Benedict, or Joseph Ratzinger, who's his name before becoming a pope, of his biography, his life story. And then I'm going to look at reflect on Benedict and evangelization under three lenses. So we're going to look at his formal roles, like how the jobs that he did within the church were related to evangelization. Second up, we'll look at some ideas and themes. So he was a tremendous thinker, and there's certainly some stuff there that is really relevant for evangelization. And then the last part will be more of a personal invitation, Benedict speaking to us and inviting and encouraging, exhorting us to mission. So I'll start with a very quick sketch of his life. So, like he's can be known as the Panzer Cardinal, the God's Rottweiler was another tag that he had. So he was the sort of theological enforcer under JP2 and was sort of seen as this really stern and fierce figure. On the other side of things, he became a bit of a fashionista with his red shoes. And he spawned a whole heap of cat memes. He really loved cats. So for us here in Australia, we might remember Benedict, his trip to Sydney for World Youth Day in 2008. So we've got a picture of him up there, and you can see his red shoes as he walks with our Prime Minister then. But again, I thought this was a great quote from World Youth Day in Sydney for us as a community. May the fire of God's love descend to fill your hearts, unite you ever more fully to the Lord and his church, and send you forth a new generation of apostles to bring the world to Christ. And he's also famous for being the first pope to resign in sort of more than 500 years. There's some of the sort of popular or common things about Benedict, but he was born in southern Germany, very close to where my mother was born. He was 6 years old when Hitler came to power, and that was a sort of difficult time for the family. His father was a policeman who was an ardent anti-Nazi. He became a priest, and then he was asked to teach in the seminary. He's clearly academically gifted, although it was heartening for me to discover that actually his first sort of postdoctorate was failed, and he had to rewrite it and do it. So that, there's hope for us all, perhaps. He was made Archbishop of Munich cardinal, and then very shortly after being made cardinal, John Paul II asked him to become the prefect for the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. So that is the sort of office charged with preserving the orthodoxy of the church. And you can imagine that was quite a difficult thing for him to hear as a theologian. Like you have your own sense of your mission and what you want to explore, the ideas and things where you want to take it. And then, of course, you're asked to serve in this particular way that naturally is going to impose some limitations and affect your freedom to speak. But he said yes, a great service to the church. And then on the death of JP2, he was chosen to be Pope. And it was a great gift for the church to have perhaps the greatest living theologian as Pope. But he wasn't really chosen for his theology, but for his proclamation of the gospel, for that speaking out of God in our culture. So that's a very, very quick run through of his life. So I'm going to move on to the first bit of my talk, where we're thinking about how those formal roles that Benedict played were shaped or touched on his sort of evangelization. So first of all, it's important to know that as the head of the doctrine of the faith, this sort of, enforcer, he really thought of that in fundamentally missionary terms. So he talks about, promoting sound doctrine in order to provide preachers of the gospel with new energies. And elsewhere he says, "My deepest purpose was always to free the true core of faith from encrustations, to restore it to energy and dynamism." So he's really not seeing this as sort of nitpicking and academic debates on the edges, but about preserving the tremendous the proclamation of the church. And he says elsewhere, I've got lots of quotes, that conserving the deposit of faith is always to nourish an explosive force against the powers of this world that threaten justice, that threaten the poor. So definitely not seeing that role as being sort of defensive or shutting things down. Very much about impelling us into missionary activity. He served on the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, and one of the examples I like to pull out of there is he was really brought in as a heavy-hitting theologian to think through issues like polygamy. So when the church is proclaiming its message in places like Africa or even traditional culture here in Australia, we come up against these cultural forms, and we know that monogamous marriage is the only form that sort of truly corresponds to our human dignity. And yet at the same time, for women that are in polygamous marriages, there's a significant part of their sort of social standing and resources or whatever that are tied up in that relationship. So it's not straightforward what has to happen. And so Benedict, in his role as theologian and champion of orthodoxy, was sort of brought into those aspects of evangelization where things are not straightforward and there are real issues to work through. He played a huge role in the production of the Catechism, again, a really positive resource for evangelization that all of us hopefully are continuing to draw on. He as Pope, he created the Pontifical Council for promoting the new evangelization, so to carry forward JP2's vision. And he said that, and I think this is really important for us to hear as a community. He talked about creating this council for the new evangelization so that the entire church, allowing herself to be regenerated by the power of the Holy Spirit, may present herself to the contemporary world with a missionary impulse in order to promote the new evangelization. And I think that really resonates with what we talk about ourselves as a community, under the power of the Holy Spirit to renew the church and to set the world on fire. The last thing I'd touch on, and it's only, it is related to evangelization, but not directly. I wanted to talk about his leadership in the leadership role in the church in the midst of the clergy sexual abuse crisis, which was a real scandal that changes how the message is is received, or how the church is heard in the world. So as head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, he was responsible for discipline, and he brought about significant change in the church's handling of sexual abuse. So he pushed so that all allegations had to go through his congregation, and over 80% of people with allegations were removed from the priesthood. When he was Pope, he revised canon law, so he streamlined disciplinary procedures to make it easier for those to go ahead and get an outcome. He extended the statute of limitations. He defined child pornography as an abuse of a child in canon law. And as Pope, he was responsible for a record number of defrockings, and for the first time met as Pope with abuse victim survivors, and that was a real feature of his trips. So, as I said, it's not directly related to evangelization, but I thought it was important because he was very much not about trying to protect the church in a way that sometimes we might be tempted to do when we're going about evangelization. And so, at a time when senior clerics were talking about, the church is under attack from the media and so on. And instead, Benedict says, attacks against the Pope or the church do not only come from outside, rather the sufferings of the church come from within, from the sins that exist in the church. This too has always been known, but today we see it in a really terrifying way. The church, therefore, has a deep need to relearn penance, to accept purification, to learn on one hand forgiveness, but also the need for justice. I think that's really important for us to reflect as we go about as ambassadors of the church, as people on mission. And so one final quote, Ratzinger, Benedict: "We do not want to listen to ourselves. We do not want to increase the power and influence of our institutions. We wish to serve the good of the people and humanity by giving room to the Lord who is life." So that was my first sort of set of reflections on Benedict in the terms of his sort of formal roles within the church. Now, in the second part, I'd like to talk about some key ideas and themes in Benedict's thoughts that are related to evangelization. And there's heaps that we could touch on here. Benedict had a lot about relativism and truth, which is obviously core to proclaiming the gospel. He had a very rich understanding of church, which again is really central to evangelization, how that's not just a personal process, but a bringing into the church. And I'd love at some point as a community to explore those things, do them a little bit more justice. But today, I'll just pick out a few. So the first thing is beauty, which for Benedict is this intrinsic part of evangelization, because it touches us in a way that sort of goes much deeper than just learning about something. And he sort of famously said, "The only really effective argument for Christianity comes down to two things, namely the saints the church has produced and the art which has grown in her womb. Better witness is born to the Lord by the splendor of holiness and art than by our apologetics," and so on. And I thought a nice example of that, as I said, he was instrumental in the catechism. And you see here, the catechism wasn't just theology written down on a page, but there was also a real push to include art, recognizing that important role, that foundational role of beauty. So here on the left, we actually have an Australian piece of work that's Mary of Wamon from up in the Kimberley, by George Mungmung, that was in the original catechism. We have the logo that was taken from a 3rd century AD tombstone in the catacombs. Or we have another miniature here from a monastery of Jesus turning to the Father in prayer. And I really love this quote. Benedict says, "Being struck and overcome by the beauty of Christ is a more real, more profound knowledge than mere rational deduction. Of course, we must not underrate the importance of theological reflection, of exact and precise theological thought. It remains absolutely necessary. But to move from here to disdain or to reject the impact produced by the response of the heart in the encounter with beauty would impoverish us and dry up our faith and our theology. So yeah, really strong on beauty, and he's a theologian, he says, but this could be a Christian generally, who does not love art, poetry, music, and nature can be dangerous. Blindness and deafness towards the beautiful are not incidental. And so for Benedict, he loved nature. I've got a photo later on of the Bavarian Alps where he loved music, especially Mozart. That strain of, and I think it's for all of us to consider how that beauty serves our proclamation, how we take that into liturgy, catechesis, all of those things. So the second sort of big idea that I wanted to unpack was Benedict was in the early days sort of famous for his clash with liberation theology, like the media love to talk about, like you had these, missionaries that were sort of for the poor, and then the big nasty Vatican enforcer was sort of pulling them into line. But I wanted to bring out that this for Benedict was really, this clash was fundamentally about what is the content of our proclamation. Like what are we putting forth when we evangelize? And he says, look, if it's no longer understood that we're in a state of alienation that is not only economic and social, one no longer understands the necessity of Christ the Redeemer. Like it's not enough, it's very important to fix structures of injustice and material needs, but that can't be the full gospel message. He says, faced with the urgency of sharing bread, some are tempted to put evangelization into parenthesis, as it were, and postpone it until tomorrow. First the bread, then the word of the Lord. It is a fatal error to separate these two, and even worse, to oppose the one to the other. So that message that we like to keep the fullness of the gospel. And of course, we recognize that in our sort of quite well-to-do material society, that doesn't mean that all is well. And at World Youth Day in Sydney, Benedict said to us, he said, in so many of our societies, side by side with material prosperity, a spiritual desert is spreading. An interior emptiness, an unnamed fear, a quiet sense of despair. How many of our contemporaries have built broken and empty cisterns in a desperate search for meaning, the ultimate meaning that only love can give? So there he is, he's sort of drawing on that image in the prophet Jeremiah who talks about people forsaking God and trying to hold on to this water with broken and empty cisterns. But that was the second big point that I wanted to bring out. And finally, and this one I really can't do justice to, is Benedict had a really profound reflection on the relationship between faith and culture. And so some aspects of that, for many of us, like missionary activity can be really tinged with the spectre of colonialism. And Benedict sort of engaged very profoundly with that question about can Christianity be universal? And, he says, look, many no longer see the history of worldwide mission as the history of the diffusion of liberating truth and love, but as a history of alienation and violation. And so he's sort of grappling with that problem, while at the same time holding on to Jesus' great commission to go and make disciples of all nations. And for Benedict, part of the resolution comes from his strong holding on to humans' universal disposition towards truth. So truth, like beauty, was a big thing for Benedict, and he chose as his episcopal motto, co-workers in the truth, from the third epistle of John. But so Benedict sees cultures sort of grappling with the resources and heritage and history they have all the time with new ideas, new encounters, and that sort of process of uncovering truth is not a violation of a culture, but it can be bringing forth, the true face of the culture that can be healing things that are not true, that don't serve human dignity. And he's very clear-sighted as well that we can't not do it, in the sense that these cultures are already always engaged with technology from the West, all of these sorts of things, and that if we just stop there and don't provide as well the liberating message of the gospel, that in a sense we get the worst of all worlds, that cultures that can't make a convincing connection between these new things that they're experiencing on the resources that they sort of have, and that don't have anything else to draw them forth, that can be just as damaging as any concerns about colonialism or the violation of cultures. So Benedict also talks a lot about culture in relation to our sort of modern secular culture, that yes, there's absolutely a need for evangelization there, and brings out a lot that like our secular state, like maybe isn't as well founded as some people would like, in absence from the dialogue with great religious traditions. Again, Benedict says here that the deepest spiritual poverty is the inability to be joyful, the conviction that life is absurd and contradictory. And again, a long quote, but I thought pretty powerful. He says, "Thus today, we often see in the faces of the young people a remarkable bitterness, a resignation that is far removed from the enthusiasm of youthful ventures into the unknown. The deepest root of this sorrow is the lack of any great hope and the unattainability of any great love. Everything one can hope for is known, and all love becomes the disappointment of finiteness in a world whose monstrous surrogates are only a pitiful disguise for profound despair." So, as I said, big quote. But like he's really pointing to that need for evangelization, to provide hope, meaning, in encounter with the Lord. And so that's where I'll finish. So we've looked a little bit at Benedict in his formal roles. We've looked at some big ideas, themes and motifs in his work. And so in this last part, we'll look at some of his personal and practical invitation to evangelization. So he's very strong that we're needed, that this is something, a call that's on us. He says, what we really need are people who are inwardly seized by Christianity, who experience it as joy and hope, who have thus become lovers. And elsewhere he says, we must be enlivened by a holy restlessness, a restlessness to bring to everyone the gift of faith, of friendship with Christ. Truly, the love and friendship of God was given to us so that it might also be shared with others. So yeah, the real invitation and exhortation for us. He talks a lot about the practical importance of prayer. He says, we ourselves cannot gather men. We must acquire them by God, for God. All methods are empty without the foundation of prayer. The word of the announcement must always be drenched in an intense life of prayer, which I think is a really important thing for us to hear as a community. And then he talks as well about how mission is rooted in prayer, but is also about drawing people into a prayer, that it's not about hearing about the Lord, but being called into relationship. And he says that's why schools of prayer, communities of prayer are so important. And I think that's something important for us to hear today. He's very good at telling us not to be discouraged if things aren't happening as we like. He says the new evangelization means we must dare once again, with the humility of the mustard seed, to leave up to God the time and manner in which the kingdom will grow. But he's also very clear that we shouldn't wait until we're perfect and we've got it all together and strength and figured it out. Like he talks that Paul wasn't successful because he was really sophisticated, but because he allowed himself to be vulnerable. So look, I consistent with those words that we heard today, I wanted to finish with Benedict as a pastor calling us to our own ongoing interior conversion and re-evangelization. That's so important. And I think Benedict was a great evangelizer. So I'm going to finish with this quote from his first homily as Pope, when he was speaking to people that, like, maybe we're a bit afraid that if we follow Jesus, if we accept him as Lord, that we might lose something, that we might somehow become diminished. And he says, if we let Christ into our lives, we lose nothing, absolutely nothing of what makes life free, beautiful, and great. No, only in this friendship are the doors of life opened wide. Only in this friendship is the great potential of human existence truly revealed. Only in this friendship do we experience beauty and liberation. And so today, with great strength and great conviction, on the basis of long personal experience of life, I say to you, dear young people, do not be afraid of Christ. He takes nothing away and he gives you everything. When we give ourselves to him, we receive 100-fold in return. Yes, open wide the doors to Christ, and you will find true life.